They say fire is the destroyer of worlds. But in Harlem, in the bitter gray winter of 1960, the destruction didn't come with a match. It didn't come with a riot or a spark or the wail of sirens that usually scored the soundtrack of the city. This time, the devastation was silent. Harlem was burning with paper, white slips of paper, stiff, official, cold to the touch. They were taped to the front doors of the brownstones lining 116th Street and Lenox Avenue, fluttering in the biting wind like flags of surrender. Eviction notices. The city of New York called it urban renewal. That was the polite, sanitized phrase printed in the newspapers downtown. But up here, on the pavement, everyone knew what urban renewal really meant. It was a fancy phrase for a brutal reality: Negro removal. It meant tearing down the beating heart of a neighborhood to build high-rise office spaces that no one living in those zip codes could ever afford to enter, let alone rent. Families who had lived in those apartments for 3 generations, families who had survived the Depression, the war, and the riots, were being told they had 30 days. 30 days to pack their lives into cardboard boxes, 30 days to erase their history, 30 days to vanish. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson stood on the corner, a solitary figure against the rushing tide of the morning commute. He was immovable, a statue carved from the very asphalt of the street. The collar of his wool coat was turned up against the wind, his fedora pulled low, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He wasn't just watching a neighborhood, he was watching his kingdom under siege. He saw Mrs. Gable, a woman whose hands had kneaded dough for every block party since 1945, step out onto her stoop. He watched her old arthritic fingers claw at the tape holding the notice to her door. She didn't scream, she didn't curse. She just crumbled the paper in her shaking hands and wept. It was a quiet, shattering sound. She had nowhere to go. To the men in suits downtown, Mrs. Gable wasn't a grandmother or a pillar of the community. She was a statistic. She was a square on a zoning map that needed to be erased to make the lines straight. Bumpy felt a cold rage settle in his gut. It wasn't the hot, impulsive anger of a street brawl. This was different. He ran Harlem. And the first rule of power is protection. If you cannot protect your people, you are not a king. You are just a bully. For the last week, Bumpy had been pulling every string he had. He had bribed councilmen until his safe was light. He had threatened contractors until they sweat through their shirts. He had called in favors from judges he had helped elect. But the demolition order was ironclad. It was a wall he couldn't punch through. This wasn't coming from the local precinct captains he kept in his pocket. This was coming from the stratosphere. It was coming from Albany. It was coming from Senator Charles Halloway. Halloway, the name tasted like ash. A rising star in New York politics, a man with a smile like a great white shark and a war chest funded by construction tycoons. Halloway was the architect of this destruction. To him, Harlem wasn't a community of jazz and struggle and triumph. It was prime real estate occupied by the wrong element. "We can't shoot a senator, Bumpy." That's what Nat Pettigrew, his right-hand man, had whispered earlier that morning in the back of the apothecary, surrounded by the smell of dried herbs and fear. You touch a hair on his head, the National Guard rolls down 125th Street by sunset. This ain't a turf war with Dutch Schultz. This is the government. Bumpy knew that. He knew that violence was a hammer, and this problem was a complex lock. But Bumpy Johnson had never met a lock he couldn't pick. "I'm not going to shoot him," Bumpy had said, the tip of his cigar glowing bright orange in the dim light. "I'm going to talk to him." That talk was the only play left on the board. It was scheduled for that night, on neutral ground. Or as neutral as it got for a black man in 1960s Manhattan. A charity gala at the Waldorf Astoria. The inner sanctum of the white elite. Halloway was the guest of honor. Bumpy had secured 2 tickets through a connection in the Musicians' Union, costing him $5,000 he would never see again. It was a desperate gamble. Later that evening, the mood in Bumpy's penthouse was heavy, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and impending violence. He stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker, while his wife, May, finished her makeup in the vanity mirror. She looked regal. There was no other word for it. She wore a floor-length gown of emerald silk that shimmered like liquid money. A diamond necklace rested against her skin, cold and bright. She didn't look like a gangster's wife. She looked like a queen who had momentarily deigned to visit the earth. "You nervous?" Bumpy asked, his voice low as he adjusted his cufflinks. May met his eyes in the reflection of the mirror. Her gaze was steady, unblinking. "About walking into a room full of people who hate us. No, I've been black in America my whole life, Ellsworth. I know how to handle a room full of stiff necks." She paused, turning on the stool to face him directly. "I'm nervous about you." "Me?" "I see that look in your eye." "What look?" "The look that says you want to throw someone through a window." Bumpy chuckled, a dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just going to have a conversation, May. Halloway is a businessman. Politicians are just gangsters who obey the law when people are watching. I just need to find out what his price is to leave those buildings standing." May stood up, smoothing the silk of her dress. "Everyone has a price, Ellsworth. Let's just hope his is affordable." They didn't know it then, but the price wouldn't be measured in dollars. As they walked out the door, leaving the safety of Harlem for the hostel, glitz of Midtown, they were walking into a trap. But it wasn't a trap made of steel bars. It was a trap made of hubris. The drive to the Waldorf Astoria was a study in silence. Inside the heavy leather-scented cabin of the Cadillac, the world was quiet. But outside, the city was screaming. They watched through the tinted glass as the landscape shifted. The warm, chaotic, living glow of Harlem, with its street corner preachers, jazz clubs, and late-night diners, faded into the rearview mirror. It was replaced by the cold, rigid brightness of Midtown. Here, the buildings were taller, the streets were cleaner, and the people walked with the brisk, unseeing stare of the very busy and the very rich. When the black Cadillac pulled up to the curb of the Waldorf, the rhythm of the night skipped a beat. The valet, a young man in a red uniform, stiffened. A black couple stepping out of a luxury car at the entrance of the city's most exclusive hotel was still a sight that caused a stutter in the heartbeat of the New York elite. It was 1960, and while the laws were changing, the eyes of the city were slow to adjust. Bumpy stepped out first. He buttoned his tuxedo jacket with a casual, practiced movement. He walked around the car, ignoring the stares, and offered his hand to May. Flashbulbs popped nearby. They weren't for them. They were for the movie stars and shipping tycoons arriving in the limousines behind them. But the exploding light gave their arrival a jagged, cinematic quality. As they ascended the grand staircase, the crowd parted. It wasn't out of respect. It was out of a primal, instinctive confusion mixed with a sense of danger. Bumpy didn't walk like a guest. He walked with a predator's grace, possessing a heavy centered gravity that made the soft men in tuxedos subconsciously step aside to let him pass. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of white faces, crystal chandeliers, and the low, buzzing murmur of polite wealth. The air smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and exclusion. Bumpy and May moved through the room like oil moving through water, distinct, separate, untouched. Eyes followed them. Whispers trailed them like the wake of a ship. "Who are they? How did they get in? Is that him?" Bumpy ignored it all. His eyes were scanning the room, hunting. He wasn't looking for appetizers. He was looking for the architect of his misery. He found his target near the orchestra pit. Senator Charles Halloway stood in a tight circle of admirers, holding a glass of amber scotch. He was a tall man, handsome in a manufactured way, with silver-streaked hair and a tan that spoke of winters spent in Florida while his constituents froze in New York. He threw his head back and laughed at something a donor said, a loud, practiced sound that carried over the music. "Showtime," Bumpy murmured. He placed a protective hand on May's lower back and guided her forward. As they approached the circle, a hush fell over the group, like a heavy blanket. The donor who had been speaking stopped mid-sentence. Halloway turned, his smile faltering for a microsecond, a glitch in the politician's mask, before he plastered it back on. He was a professional. He knew how to handle the unexpected, even when the unexpected was a Harlem crime boss crashing his party. "Senator Halloway," Bumpy said. His voice was a low rumble that cut through the uncomfortable silence. "I'm Ellsworth Johnson. This is my wife, May." Halloway's eyes flicked to his security detail, standing a few feet away, then back to Bumpy. He knew exactly who Ellsworth Johnson was. Every power player in New York knew. "Mr. Johnson," Halloway said, his voice smooth, betraying no fear. "A surprise. I didn't see your name on the guest list." "I have friends in the musicians' union," Bumpy said, offering a tight shark-like smile. "They insisted I come. They know I have a deep interest in urban development." The tension in the circle was thick enough to choke on. The other guests were frozen, watching the collision of two very different worlds, the King of Harlem and the Prince of Albany. "Urban development," Halloway repeated, swirling his scotch. "Yes, I've heard you're a man who cares deeply about community infrastructure." "I care about the people living in it," Bumpy said, dropping the pleasantries. "The demolition orders on 116th Street. We need to discuss them." Halloway chuckled, a dismissive, arrogant sound. "Mr. Johnson, this is a charity gala to save the whales, not a city council meeting. I'm hardly in the headspace for a policy debate." "I'm not here to debate policy," Bumpy said, stepping half an inch closer, invading the senator's personal space just enough to unsettle him. "I'm here to make a donation to your campaign, a substantial one, in exchange for a reconsideration of the zoning map." Money. The universal language. Halloway's eyes changed instantly. The dismissal vanished, replaced by a greedy curiosity. Looked Bumpy up and down, calculating the worth of the suit, the watch, the man. Then, his eyes slid to May, and that was the moment everything shifted. Halloway looked at her longer than was polite. His gaze wasn't just appreciative, it was hungry. It lingered on her neck, the curve of her waist, the defiant set of her chin. May held his gaze, her expression turning to stone. She knew men like this, men who thought their power gave them the right to consume anything beautiful in their line of sight. "A donation," Halloway said softly, his eyes still fixed on May. "Well, I'm always open to supporting my constituents' interests." He finally looked back at Bumpy, checking his watch. "I have a brief window before the keynote speech. My suite is upstairs, room 402. Why don't you and your lovely wife join me for a private drink? We can discuss the figures away from the noise." Bumpy felt a warning bell ring in the back of his mind. The invitation was standard, backroom deals always. Happened in suites. But the way Halloway was looking at May made Bumpy's blood run cold. It was a look of ownership. Still, he thought of Mrs. Gable crying at her door. He thought of the families who would be on the street in 30 days. "We'll be there," Bumpy said. Halloway nodded, downed his drink, and walked away, his security trailing him. "I don't like him," May whispered as soon as he was gone. "He looks at people like he wants to eat them." "He's a snake," Bumpy agreed, watching the senator disappear into the crowd. "But snakes are easier to deal with than lions. You can charm a snake. Come on, let's get this over with." They moved toward the elevators, leaving the safety of the public eye. They were ascending to the 4th floor, to room 402. They thought they were going to negotiate a bribe. They didn't know they were walking into an insult that would start a war. The elevator ride to the 4th floor was a transition between worlds. They left the noise of the gala behind, ascending into a silence that felt pressurized. When the golden doors slid open, they stepped onto a plush hallway carpet that swallowed the sound of their footsteps. It was a place designed for privacy, for secrets whispered away from the grit of the street. They found room 402. Bumpy knocked. The sound was sharp, authoritative. The door was opened almost instantly by one of Halloway's bodyguards, a thick-necked man with eyes like flat stones. He patted Bumpy down for weapons with rough, efficient hands. Bumpy submitted to it, his jaw tight, his muscles coiled. He had left his piece in the car, knowing the Waldorf had security. He was unarmed. To a man like Bumpy Johnson, walking into a rival's den without a weapon felt like walking in naked. The guard stepped back, and they entered. The suite was massive, a sprawling expanse of velvet sofas, mahogany tables, and a panoramic view of the skyline that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Halloway had already removed his jacket and loosened his tie. He stood by a wet bar, the crystal decanter in his hand catching the city light. "Scotch?" Halloway offered, not turning around. "No, thank you," Bumpy said, his voice flat. We won't be staying long." Halloway turned, holding 2 glasses anyway. He walked over and extended one to May, ignoring Bumpy completely. "Mrs. Johnson, surely you'll join me. It's a very rare single malt, aged 20 years. May looked at the glass, then up at Halloway. Her expression was unreadable. "I don't drink with strangers, Senator." Halloway smiled, a wet, unpleasant expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Strangers are just friends who haven't found common ground yet." He set the glass down on the coffee table with a deliberate clink and sat on the edge of the sofa, spreading his legs in a display of arrogant comfort. "So," the senator began, "the building's on 116th, prime location. The developers want to put up a commercial center, offices for lawyers, accountants. It will bring revenue to the city." "It will put 300 families on the street," Bumpy said, remaining standing. He loomed over the senator, a dark monolith in the center of the room. "I'm willing to match the tax revenue the city expects for the first 2 years. In cash." Halloway laughed. "Cash? You people always think in terms of cash. It's quaint." Bumpy's hands curled into fists at his sides. The insult was casual, tossed out like a wrapper. "You people." The racial undertone hung in the air like cigar smoke. "The problem, Mr. Johnson," Halloway said quickly, "is that the developers have already paid me, and they paid me a lot. To stop this train, you'd have to offer me something unique, something I can't get from a checkbook." "Name your price," Bumpy said. Halloway stood up. He walked slowly toward May. Bumpy stepped in front of him, blocking his path, a wall of muscle and tuxedo wool. Halloway stopped, inches from Bumpy's chest, but he craned his neck to look around him, his eyes locking onto May. "I have power," Halloway whispered, his voice dropping to a slur. "I have the mayor on speed dial. What I don't have is a thrill. I'm bored, Mr. Johnson. Politics is boring. Winning is boring." He looked Bumpy in the eye, and the madness was visible there, the madness of a man who had never been told no. "You want to save your little neighborhood? You want those old ladies to keep their apartments?" Halloway gestured to the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. "I want one night with her." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Bumpy stared at him. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. For a second, his brain couldn't process the words. It was such a violation, such a grotesque absurdity, that reality seemed to bend. "Excuse me?" Bumpy said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "You heard me," Halloway said. His confidence bordered on insanity. He was drunk on his own invincibility. "I've always been curious. I've heard stories about the passion of your people. I want to experience it. One night. She stays here. You go. In the morning, I call the mayor and cancel the demolition. The buildings stay up forever." May made a sound, a sharp intake of breath, like she had been slapped. Bumpy felt a red haze creep into the edges of his vision. The rage was different from anything he had ever felt. It wasn't the hot anger of a street fight. It was a cold, absolute resolve to end a life. But his mind was racing. If I kill him here, now, with his guards outside, we both die. Or we go to the chair, and the buildings still come down. "You must have lost your mind," Bumpy whispered. "You think my wife is for sale?" "Everything is for sale," Halloway said with a smirk. "That's capitalism, isn't it? You sell heroin, I sell legislation. We're both businessmen. Don't act righteous with me, boy. It's a transaction. Her body for 300 homes. That's a noble sacrifice, isn't it?" Bumpy moved. He grabbed Halloway by the throat. It happened so fast the senator didn't even time to gasp. Bumpy slammed him back against the wall, lifting him off his feet. Expensive artwork rattled on the walls. The senator's eyes bulged, his hands clawing uselessly at Bumpy's wrist. "Ellsworth!" May screamed. "Don't!" Bumpy's thumb dug into Halloway's windpipe. He could feel the pulse fluttering there, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He wanted to crush it. He wanted to squeeze until the light went out. "I should tear your head off," Bumpy snarled, his face inches from Halloway's turning purple. "You think because you have a title you can speak to us like dogs?" "Ellsworth, the guards!" May was pulling at his other arm. "If you kill him, we don't leave this room. Think." Bumpy's chest heaved. He looked at Halloway, gasping and turning blue. He looked at May, terrified, but clear-eyed. She was right. The bodyguards outside were armed. If there was a struggle, shots fired. Bumpy and May would be dead before they hit the hallway carpet, and the morning papers would report that a crazed gangster attacked a senator. The narrative would be written in blood, and Harlem would pay the price. With a growl of frustration that sounded like tearing metal, Bumpy released his grip. Halloway dropped to the floor, coughing and hacking, clutching his throat. "We're leaving," Bumpy said, grabbing May's hand. "Now!" He pulled her toward the door. Halloway, on his hands and knees, wheezed, sucking in air. As they reached the door, Halloway's voice croaked out, raspy and desperate. "Wait!" Bumpy stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He didn't turn around. "You're walking away from the deal," Halloway wheezed. He scrambled to his feet, holding onto the sofa for support. His fear had been replaced by a twisted, desperate anger. He couldn't believe he had been touched. He couldn't believe he had been denied. "You think you can just walk out on me? I can have those buildings bulldozed tomorrow." Bumpy turned slowly. "Burn them down for all I care. We're done." "Money!" Halloway shouted. He ran to a desk in the corner and unlocked a drawer. He pulled out a thick stack of cash banded in bank straps. "It's not enough? You want money too? Here." He threw the stack of bills onto the coffee table. It hit with a heavy thud. "That's $50,000, Halloway panted. He pulled out another stack. 75, 100? He threw a second brick of cash. "I will pay you $100,000 right now to leave her here. Look at it. That's more money than you've ever seen in your life, boy. Take it. Sell her to me." The air in the room seemed to shatter. Bumpy looked at the pile of green on the table. $100,000 in 1960. A fortune. Enough to buy a mansion, a business, a new life. And this man, this elected official, this pillar of society, was offering it to buy a human being. It was the ultimate insult. It was slavery with a fresh coat of paint. Bumpy let go of May's hand. "Ellsworth," May whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's just go." Bumpy didn't hear her. He walked back into the room. Halloway smiled, wiping his mouth, thinking he had won, thinking the money had done what the threat couldn't. "That's it," he panted. "Smart man. Every man has a price. Just leave her, take the cash, and go." Bumpy stopped at the coffee table. He looked down at the money. Then he looked up at Halloway. "You think," Bumpy said, his voice devoid of all emotion, "that because I'm a criminal I have no code? You think because I'm black I have no soul? I think you like money," Halloway sneered. "Now get out." Bumpy reached into his tuxedo jacket. He didn't have his normal piece, but Bumpy Johnson never walked anywhere completely naked. Tucked into the inner lining of his cummerbund was a small, pearl-handled Derringer. 2 shots, .22 caliber. Not a war weapon, but at this range, lethal. He drew it in a blur of motion. Halloway's eyes went wide. He opened his mouth to scream for the guards. Bumpy lunged across the table, kicking the money aside. He grabbed Halloway by his expensive tie and jammed the barrel of the small gun under the senator's chin. "Make a sound," Bumpy hissed, "and I paint the ceiling with your brains." Halloway froze. A whimper escaped his throat, but he clamped his mouth shut. He could feel the cold metal digging into the soft skin under his jaw. He smelled the gun oil and the faint woody scent of Bumpy's cologne. "You offered me money for my wife?" Bumpy whispered, leaning in so close their foreheads touched. "You tried to buy her like she was a car, like she was cattle." "Please," Halloway squeaked, his eyes squeezed shut. I was drunk. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," Bumpy said. "You're a sick man, Senator, a disease, and usually I cut diseases out." Bumpy's finger tightened on the trigger. The hammer began to pull back. Halloway began to shake uncontrollably. A dark stain spread across the front of his gray trousers. He had wet himself. "Ellsworth." May was at his side again, her hand firm on his shoulder. "Look at him. He's pathetic. He peed himself. Don't throw your life away for a stain like him." Bumpy looked at the senator, shivering and sobbing, reeking of fear and urine. May was right. Killing him now would be a mercy. Living with the knowledge that he had begged and soiled himself in front of the man he tried to humiliate? That was a different kind of punishment, but it wasn't enough. Bumpy lowered the hammer. He didn't holster the gun. He kept it pressed to Halloway's cheek. "I'm not going to kill you tonight," Bumpy said, "because you're not worth the electric chair. But you listen to me." He slapped Halloway across the face with the pistol, a sharp crack that split the senator's lip. If you send the police, if you send the feds, I will tell every newspaper in this city that Senator Halloway offered $100,000 to sleep with a gangster's wife. I'll ruin you, understand? Halloway nodded frantically, blood dripping down his chin. And as for the buildings, Bumpy said, stepping back, we're not done. I'm going to stop you, and I'm going to do it without firing a shot. I'm going to make you wish you had never heard the name Johnson. Bumpy spat on the pile of money on the floor. Let's go, May. They walked out of the room, past the oblivious guards in the hallway. They didn't speak in the elevator. They didn't speak as they walked through the lobby, past the glitz and the glamour that now felt like a thin veneer over a rotting carcass. But in the car, as Harlem rose up around them again, Bumpy's mind was already at war. Violence was a hammer, but he needed a scalpel. Halloway had tried to use money to destroy Bumpy's family. So, Bumpy would use secrets to destroy Halloway's. The next morning, the demolition crews were back on 116th Street, painting red X's on the doors. The clock was ticking. Bumpy stood on a rooftop with Nat Pettigrew, watching the vultures circle. We need leverage, Nat, Bumpy said, watching the surveyors below. Did you find her? Nat exhaled a cloud of gray smoke. Margaret Halloway, 42 years old money from Connecticut. She married Charles 10 years ago. From what the maids tell my cousin who works at their townhouse, it ain't exactly a fairy tale. Talk to me, Bumpy said. The senator sleeps in hotels. Margaret sleeps alone. She spends her days shopping and her nights drinking expensive wine. She's a prop, Bumpy. He trots her out for elections, puts her in a nice dress, and then puts her back in the box. And there's something else. My cousin says Halloway has a ledger, a blue book. He writes in it late at night in his study, then hides it in a wall safe behind a painting. He guards it like it's his own heart. Bumpy smiled. It was a cold, predatory thing. A neglected wife is a dangerous thing, Nat. She's sitting on a powder keg of resentment. All she needs is someone to light the fuse. And you're the match? No, Bumpy said. I'm the buyer. Halloway wanted to buy my wife for pleasure. I'm going to buy his wife for business. That Thursday night, the Metropolitan Opera House was a cathedral of gold leaf and red velvet. Bumpy Johnson walked through the heavy brass doors, moving with a quiet, lethal elegance. He bypassed the main seating and moved up the sweeping staircase to the private boxes. Box 14. He slipped inside. Margaret Halloway sat in a velvet chair, alone. She was watching the stage, but her eyes were empty. She sensed him before she saw him. She stiffened, turning her head sharply. Charles, she whispered, dread lacing her voice. No, Mrs. Halloway, Bumpy said, stepping out of the shadows. Charles is busy tonight. Poker game at the Velvet Room, or so he says. Margaret stood up, knocking her purse over. Who are you? I'll call security. You could, Bumpy said calmly, holding up his empty hands. But then, we wouldn't have the conversation you've been waiting 10 years to have. What conversation? The one where someone finally asks you what you want. The one where someone acknowledges that being the wife of Senator Halloway is a prison sentence, not a privilege. Margaret stared at him. She recognized him from the papers. The gangster. But in this light, he didn't look like a thug. He looked like a businessman offering a lifeline. He tried to buy my wife, Bumpy said, dropping the bomb without preamble. Last night. Offered me $100,000 to leave her with him. Margaret's face went pale. She slumped back into her chair. She didn't call him a liar. She knew her husband too well. That sounds like Charles, she whispered bitterly. He thinks he owns the world. I want to make a purchase, Mrs. Halloway, Bumpy said, placing a thick envelope on the velvet railing. $50,000, cash, untraceable. Your husband tried to buy my wife's body. I want to buy your husband's secrets. Margaret looked at the envelope. You want the blue book? Bumpy nodded. I know it's in the safe behind the painting. I know he keeps the combination in his head. But I also know he writes things down when he's drunk. If I give it to you, Margaret said, her voice trembling, not with fear but with adrenaline, will you destroy him? I will strip him naked before the world, Bumpy promised. He will never humiliate you again. Margaret reached out and took the envelope. It was the first act of rebellion she had committed in a decade. Tuesday morning, she said. The gardener's entrance. I'll hide it in the greenhouse. Tuesday came. The handoff was executed with military precision. Nat Pettigrew, dressed as a florist, retrieved a burlap sack from the Halloway greenhouse. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was the ledger. Bumpy opened it in the back of the van. He expected to find evidence of bribes. He expected corruption. But what he found was a nuclear weapon. Halloway wasn't just taking bribes from construction companies. He was laundering money for the Italian mob, the Genovese family. There were names in that book that carried death sentences. Jackpot? Nat asked from the driver's seat. Bumpy closed the book, his hand resting on the leather cover. This isn't just leverage, Nat. This is a nuke. If the feds see this, he goes to prison. If the Genovese find out he kept a record of their business, they cut him into pieces small enough to fit in an ashtray. Bumpy looked out the window at the city passing by. Take us to the bank. I need to make a withdrawal for Mrs. Halloway. She earned every penny. He had the weapon. Now, all that was left was to pull the trigger. Senator Charles Halloway was having a bad week, but he assumed the worst was over. He sat in his study, nursing a drink, looking at the architectural blueprints for the new Halloway Plaza. It was going to be his legacy, a shining tower of glass and steel rising from the rubble of the slum. The phone rang. He picked it up, expecting a donor. "Halloway," he said. "Senator." Bumpy Johnson's voice came through the line, clear and terrifyingly calm. "I think you lost something." Halloway stiffened. "Johnson, if you're calling to threaten me again, save your breath. The bulldozers roll on Monday. My security has been doubled. You can't get near me." "I don't need to get near you," Bumpy said. "I'm looking at your ledger, Charles. The blue one, page 42. Donation from VG. That wouldn't be Vito Genovese, would it?" Halloway dropped his glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, scotch splashing across the rug. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. That's impossible," Halloway stammered. "That book is in my safe." "Is it?" Bumpy asked. "Check." Halloway dropped the receiver, leaving it dangling by the cord. He ran to the painting of the ship on the wall, tore it aside, and spun the dial on the safe. He wrenched it open, empty. "No!" Halloway screamed. It was a guttural animal sound of pure terror. He frantically felt around the empty metal box as if the book might be invisible. It was gone. Margaret. It had to be. She was the only one who had been home all day. He ran back to the phone, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold it. "Johnson, listen to me. You don't know what you have. If you release that—" "I know exactly what I have," Bumpy interrupted. "I have your head on a platter. The feds get this. You rot in a cell. The Italians get this? Well, they don't like people writing down their business. They'll solve the problem permanently." "What do you want?" Halloway begged, dropping to his knees on the wet rug. "Money? I'll give you the 100,000. I'll give you double. 200,000. "I don't want your money, Charles. I spent 50 grand of my own just to buy that book from your wife." Halloway choked. "My wife? She's gone, Charles. She sold you out. And frankly, she gave me a discount. Now, listen carefully. Anything. I want a meeting. Tonight, in Harlem. Small's Paradise on 135th. Come alone. If I see a bodyguard, if I see a cop, copies of this book go to the New York Times and to Fat Tony Salerno. Do you understand?" I understand. I'll be there." "And Charles?" "Yes? Bring your knees. You're going to need them." The line went dead. An hour later, Charles Halloway stepped out of a cab in Harlem. He was wearing a trench coat over his suit, his hat pulled low. He felt eyes on him from every corner. He felt the weight of the city pressing down on him. He hurried to the door of the club and pushed it open. Inside, Small's Paradise was dark. The air smelled of stale smoke and floor wax. A single spotlight illuminated a table in the center of the dance floor. Bumpy Johnson sat there. He was smoking a cigar, the blue book resting casually under his hand. Next to him sat May. She looked radiant, terrifyingly beautiful, watching Halloway with an expression of cool detachment. Halloway walked toward them, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. He stopped 10 feet away. "Johnson," Halloway said, his voice trembling. "I'm here." "So you are," Bumpy said. He didn't stand up. "You look tired, Senator." "Give me the book," Halloway said, trying to summon a shred of authority. "I'll cancel the demolition. I'll sign the order tonight. Just give me the book." "We'll get to the demolition," Bumpy said, taking a drag of the cigar and blowing the smoke toward Halloway. "But first, there's a matter of disrespect." Bumpy pointed to the floor in front of May. "You came into my life and treated my wife like a commodity," Bumpy said calmly. "You offered me money to debase her. You thought you were a king and we were peasants." Halloway swallowed hard. I apologized on the phone." "Not good enough," Bumpy said. "I want you to apologize to her now, and I want you to do it properly." Halloway looked at May. He looked at the floor. The humiliation clawed at his throat. He was a United States Senator. He was a white man of power and influence. Kneeling before a gangster's wife in a Harlem jazz club was a death of the ego so profound he felt like vomiting. "I can't," Halloway whispered. Bumpy picked up the book. "Fat Tony Salerno lives in Brooklyn. I can have a messenger there in 20 minutes. He really hates rats." Charles Halloway made a noise like a wounded animal. He looked at the book, his life, his freedom, his safety. Then he looked at Bumpy's implacable face. Slowly, agonizingly, Senator Charles Halloway lowered himself. One knee hit the dusty floor, then the other. He bowed his head. "Say it," Bumpy commanded. "Mrs. Johnson," Halloway whispered to the floorboards. "I apologize." "I can't hear you," May said. Her voice was sharp, cutting. Halloway squeezed his eyes shut, tears of rage and shame leaking out. "Mrs. Johnson, I apologize. I was wrong. I disrespected you and I'm sorry." "Look at her," Bumpy snapped. Halloway looked up. He looked into May's eyes. "I am sorry," he choked out. "Please forgive me." May held his gaze for a long moment. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just looked at him with pity. "You're a small man, Senator," she said softly. "Get up. You're staining the floor." Halloway scrambled to his feet, wiping his face. "The book," he gasped. "Please, the book." Bumpy stood up. He picked up the ledger. "The demolition stops," Bumpy said, "permanently. You declare the block a historic landmark. You put it in writing tomorrow morning." "Yes," Halloway said. "Yes, I will. I swear." "And," Bumpy continued, "you resign from the zoning committee, citing health reasons. I don't want you anywhere near Harlem ever again." "Done," Halloway said. "Just give it to me." Bumpy looked at the book. Then he looked at Halloway. "You know, Charles, if I give you this book, you might just burn it and come after us again next week." "No, I won't, I swear." "I don't trust you," Bumpy said. "So here's the deal. I'm going to keep the book." Halloway's eyes went wide. "What? No, that wasn't the deal." "The deal is you stay alive," Bumpy said, his voice dropping to a growl. "I keep the book in a safe deposit box. As long as the buildings stand, and as long as you stay out of my way, the book stays in the dark. But if I see one brick fall on 116th Street, if I see one police car harassing my people, if I even dream that you are thinking about revenge, copies go to the feds and the mob." Bumpy walked up to Halloway and shoved the cigar into the senator's breast pocket, burning the silk. "I own you, Charles. You work for me now. Get out of my club." Halloway stood there, broken. He realized with dawning horror that Bumpy was right. He wasn't free. He was a puppet, and Bumpy Johnson held the strings, forever. He turned and ran. He ran out of the club, into the Harlem night, fleeing the consequences of his own greed. Bumpy watched him go, then turned to May. "You okay?" May smoothed her dress. She walked over to Bumpy and kissed him on the cheek. "I'm fine," she said. He looked good on his knees. Bumpy chuckled. He tossed the blue book onto the table. "Yes, he did." "So," May said, pouring herself another drink, "you bought his wife, you stole his secrets, and you saved the neighborhood. Not bad for a week's work." "Just business, May," Bumpy said, looking toward the door where the senator had fled. "Just business." Outside, the rain began to fall again, washing the streets clean. The demolition notices on 116th Street would be gone by morning. The families would sleep safe. And somewhere in the dark, a senator was realizing that money couldn't buy everything. But leverage could buy a kingdom.